One first-class seat, one pregnant stranger, one moment of human decency. And suddenly a billionaire's son discovers that blood runs thicker than business deals, even when it's been kept secret for years. The little boy reaching for him, with familiar green eyes, holds the power to either heal a fractured family or tear an empire apart at the seams. In the sky where dreams take flight, Ryan Reynolds is about to learn that some connections transcend class, race, and even the walls his father built to keep his two worlds forever apart. She clutched the boarding pass like a lifeline, her 2-year-old son balanced on her hip as passengers pushed past them in the narrow aisle. When she looked up at the young man in 1A, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, fear, and a desperate hope she couldn't name. Welcome to another story that will touch your heart and remind you that love appears when we least expect it. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, and let's pray for everyone in this family around the world as we share this journey together. The leather seat in first class felt cold against Ryan Reynolds' back as he stared out the airplane window, watching ground crew load baggage with mechanical precision. At 28, he'd built a tech empire worth $40 million, but success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. His father, billionaire media mogul Harrison Reynolds, had been absent for most of his childhood, always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition, the next headline. Ryan's phone buzzed with another text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. Your father wants the Q4 projections ready. He deleted it without responding. Even now, at the pinnacle of his own success, he was still just trying to earn Harrison's approval. A man who measured love in stock points and quarterly earnings. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay due to overbooking issues. We appreciate your patience. Ryan loosened his tie and closed his eyes, trying to silence the familiar ache in his chest. Money couldn't buy the one thing he'd always wanted, a real family. 3 rows behind him, in the cramped coach section, Zoe Washington shifted her 2-year-old son Michael on her lap, her pregnant belly making the narrow seat even more uncomfortable. At 26, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispered stares from other passengers. Her clothes were clean but worn, her wedding ring, a simple band she'd bought herself, catching the overhead light. Michael, with his striking green eyes and sandy brown hair, babbled softly as he played with a small toy car. Those eyes, they were a constant reminder of secrets she carried, of a love that could never be publicly acknowledged, of a man who'd promised her the world but kept her hidden in its shadows. "Mommy tired?" Michael asked in his sweet toddler voice, touching her face with tiny fingers. "Mommy's okay, baby," she whispered, though her back ached and her feet were swollen. The coach ticket had cost her last $200, but she had to get to New York. Harrison's lawyers had finally agreed to meet with her, not about recognition or money, but about Michael's future. Her son deserved better than living in the margins of his father's empire. A commotion near the front of the plane caught her attention. A flight attendant was speaking animatedly to a businessman in an expensive suit, gesturing toward the coach section. Zoe's heart sank as she recognized the conversation. Someone was getting bumped from the flight. "Ma'am." The flight attendant approached with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, but we need to accommodate a priority passenger. We can put you on the next flight tomorrow morning." "No, please," Zoe's voice cracked. "I have a meeting I can't miss. My son." She looked down at Michael, who was starting to sense her distress. The flight attendant's expression softened, but remained firm. "I'm sorry, but—" "Excuse me." A deep voice interrupted. Ryan Reynolds stood in the aisle, having overheard the exchange. He looked at Zoe, taking in her pregnant condition, the exhausted toddler in her arms, and something shifted in his chest. "She can have my seat." "Sir, that's very generous, but first class is—" "I'll take her coach seat," Ryan said firmly, his eyes never leaving Zoe's face. There was something about her that made him want to protect her, though he couldn't explain why. The pregnant woman and her child need the extra space more than I do. Zoe stared at him in shock. In all her 26 years, no one had ever sacrificed anything for her, especially not a stranger. I can't accept that. Your ticket must have cost. Money isn't everything, Ryan said quietly, and for the first time in months he meant it. Please, let me do this. As their eyes met, something electric passed between them. Not romantic attraction, but something deeper. A recognition that neither could name, a pull that defied logic. Michael looked up at Ryan with those remarkable green eyes and smiled. Nice man, he declared, reaching out his small hand. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The child's eyes were identical to his own. The same unusual shade of green that ran in the Reynolds family. The same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The first-class cabin felt surreal to Zoe as the flight attendant helped her settle into the leather seat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Michael immediately began exploring the armrest buttons with wonder, his small fingers pressing everything within reach. Careful, baby, Zoe whispered, acutely aware of the other first-class passenger's stares. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Ryan had taken her cramped middle seat in row 14, squeezed between a businessman with sharp elbows and a woman who kept glancing at him with obvious recognition. But he found himself constantly looking forward, watching the woman he'd helped. There was something hauntingly familiar about her profile, the way she held her son with such protective tenderness. 30 minutes into the flight, Michael began to fuss. The altitude change was bothering his ears, and his soft whimpers quickly escalated to full crying. Zoe felt heat rise in her cheeks as disapproving looks shot her way. I'm sorry, she murmured to no one in particular, rocking Michael gently. Sure, baby, it's okay. But Michael's cries grew louder, more distressed. Other passengers were sighing, shifting in their seats, making their irritation known. Zoe's anxiety spiked. This was exactly what she'd feared. She didn't belong in first class, and now everyone knew it. Maybe you should take him to the back, suggested the woman across the aisle, her voice dripping with condescension. Tears pricked Zoe's eyes. She started to unbuckle her seatbelt, ready to retreat to the bathroom with her crying son, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Mind if I try? She turned to find Ryan standing in the aisle. He'd somehow made his way up from coach, his expression gentle and concerned. Sir, you need to return to your seat, the flight attendant began, but Ryan raised a hand. Just give me 1 minute. He knelt beside Zoe's seat, bringing himself to Michael's eye level. The toddler's cries faltered as he studied this stranger's face with curiosity. Hey there, little man, Ryan said softly. Ears hurt? Michael nodded, sniffling. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening a simple game with colorful bubbles. Want to see something cool? As the bright colors danced across the screen, Michael's crying stopped entirely. His green eyes, those impossibly familiar green eyes, widened with fascination. Better? Ryan asked, and Michael nodded, reaching for the phone. Ryan handed it over without hesitation, then looked up at Zoe. Altitude change affects their ears. Distraction usually helps. Thank you, Zoe whispered, and something in her voice made Ryan's chest tighten. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Their eyes met again, and this time the connection was unmistakable. What's his name? Michael, she said softly. And I'm Zoe. Ryan. He studied the child's face more closely now. The resemblance was startling. Not just the eyes, but the shape of his nose, the stubborn set of his jaw. How old is he? 2.5. Zoe's voice carried a weight that suggested there was more to that simple answer. Ryan's mind raced. 2.5 years ago. He tried to remember what his father had been doing, where he'd been traveling. Harrison Reynolds had business interests all over the country, was constantly flying somewhere for meetings, acquisitions, conferences. "Excuse me, sir." The flight attendant's voice was firmer now. "I really do need you to return to your seat." Ryan nodded, but didn't move immediately. Something was happening here, something important that he couldn't quite grasp. "Zoe, can I ask, where are you headed in New York?" She hesitated, her fingers unconsciously twisting her wedding ring. "I have a business meeting. With some lawyers." "What kind of business?" The question hung in the air between them. Zoe looked down at Michael, who was contentedly playing with Ryan's phone, completely unaware that his simple existence was about to turn two lives upside down. "It's complicated," she said finally. Ryan was about to press further when Michael looked up from the phone and smiled. That bright, innocent smile that children give so freely. But it was what he said next that made Ryan's world tilt on its axis. "Daddy." Michael reached his small arms toward Ryan, as if recognizing something fundamental, something beyond explanation. The word hit the cabin like a gunshot. Other passengers turned to stare. The flight attendant paused mid-step. Zoe's face went chalk white. "No, baby," she whispered urgently, gently pulling Michael's hands down. "This is Ryan. He's just a nice man helping us." But Michael wasn't deterred. He kept reaching for Ryan, kept saying "Daddy," with increasing insistence, as if frustrated that the adults weren't understanding something obvious. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. He looked from Michael's earnest green eyes to Zoe's panicked expression, and suddenly the pieces began forming a picture he wasn't ready to see. "How long have you been married?" he asked quietly. Zoe's silence was deafening. "Zoe," Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you been married?" She looked at him with eyes full of pain, secrets, and something that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been carrying this burden alone for too long. 3 years, she said finally. "I've been married for 3 years." "To who?" Michael continued reaching for Ryan, babbling "Daddy, Daddy," while the first-class cabin held its collective breath. Zoe closed her eyes, as if saying the words would make everything real, would change everything forever. "Harrison Reynolds," she whispered. "I'm married to Harrison Reynolds." The world stopped. Ryan stared at her, his mind refusing to process what he'd just heard. His father, his distant, cold, business-obsessed father, was married? Had another child? This beautiful woman with her kind eyes and gentle hands was his stepmother? This little boy calling him Daddy was his half-brother, he breathed. Zoe's eyes flew open, meeting his shocked gaze. In that moment, everything clicked into place. Why Michael looked so familiar, why she'd seemed to recognize him, why the child had instinctively reached for him. They were family, and neither of them had known it until this moment, 30,000 feet in the air, in a chance encounter that felt anything but chance. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Ryan stood frozen in the aisle, his world crashing down around him, while other passengers pretended not to stare at the unfolding drama. "No," he said finally, shaking his head. "That's impossible. My father isn't married. He would have told me. I would have known." Zoe's face crumpled with a mixture of pain and resignation. "Your father?" She looked down at Michael, who was still reaching for Ryan with innocent persistence. "Your father keeps certain parts of his life very separate. Sir, please return to your seat immediately." The flight attendant's voice cut through the tension, but Ryan barely heard her. "This is insane," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. "You're telling me that my father, Harrison Reynolds, has been married for 3 years and never mentioned it? Never introduced his wife to his son? Never?" He stopped, the full implications hitting him. "Oh God, you've been hidden." Tears welled in Zoe's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I don't expect you to understand." "Understand?" Ryan's voice rose, causing heads to turn. "Lady, I don't even know you. You could be anyone making up stories for." "For what?" Zoe's quiet strength cut through his panic. "For a first-class seat? For attention? Look at me, Ryan. Really look at me. Do I look like someone who would lie about this? She didn't. Everything about her radiated honesty, from her worn but clean clothes to the way she held Michael with such protective love. But accepting her truth meant accepting that his father had lied to him for years. "Daddy sad?" Michael asked, his small voice breaking the tension. He'd stopped reaching for Ryan, and was now studying his face with concern that seemed far too mature for a 2-year-old. "I'm not your daddy," Ryan said, but the words came out harsher than he intended. Michael's face fell, and he buried his head against Zoe's shoulder. "You don't have to be cruel," Zoe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's just a baby." Ryan felt like a monster, but the whole situation was spiraling beyond his control. "This is crazy. Even if what you're saying is true, why are you on this flight? Why now?" Zoe's hand instinctively moved to her pregnant belly. "Because I finally found the courage to ask for what my children deserve." "Children?" Ryan's voice cracked. "I'm 6 months pregnant." She met his eyes directly. "With your father's second child. Michael's little sister." The words hit Ryan like physical blows. Not only did his father have a secret wife and son, but another child was coming. A whole family that existed without him, while he'd spent his entire life trying to earn one moment of Harrison's genuine attention. "I need to see proof," he said desperately. "Marriage certificate, something. Anyone can claim." Zoe reached into her worn purse with shaking hands and pulled out a folded document. "Here." Ryan stared at the marriage certificate, his father's bold signature stark against the official paper. The date was 3 years ago, right around the time Harrison had taken that extended business trip to California that had lasted 2 months. "He told me he was setting up a new office," Ryan said numbly. "He was," Zoe said softly. "And he met me there. I was working as a server at the hotel where he stayed. I was putting myself through nursing school, working 3 jobs." Her voice trailed off. "I never expected someone like him to notice someone like me." Ryan could picture it perfectly. His father's charm, his ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the world when it served his purposes. "So he swept you off your feet." "It wasn't like that." Zoe's voice carried a defensive edge. "Harrison was different then. Gentler. He said he was tired of the corporate world, tired of superficial relationships. He said I made him want to be a better man." "And you believed him?" "I loved him," she said simply. "I still do." The admission hung between them like an accusation. Here was a woman who loved his father, truly loved him, while Ryan had spent 28 years fighting for scraps of approval. "Sir," the flight attendant's voice was sharp now, "I'm going to have to call security if you don't return to your seat." "Go," Zoe said quietly. "Please. I shouldn't have told you. This isn't how I wanted." But Ryan couldn't move. "How did you want it? Were you ever going to tell me I had a brother? Or were you planning to keep us separated forever, just like he has?" "That's not fair," Zoe's voice cracked. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to raise my son in secret, to be the woman no one acknowledges? To have Michael ask why Daddy never takes us anywhere together, why we can't visit his office, why?" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Then why stay?" Ryan demanded. "Why put yourself through that?" "Because I love him," she repeated, but this time her voice was barely a whisper. "And because Michael deserves to know his father, even if it's complicated." "Complicated?" Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "That's what you call this? My father has been living a double life for 3 years. I've been killing myself trying to prove I'm worthy of his time and attention. And meanwhile he's got a whole other family he actually chose." The pain in his voice seemed to reach Zoe, and her expression softened. "Ryan, it's not about worth. Isn't it?" He looked at Michael, who was watching their conversation with those 2 knowing eyes. "He chose you. He chose him. He married you, had a child with you, got you pregnant again. But me? His actual son? I get board meetings and quarterly reports and 5-minute phone calls between flights. Maybe he doesn't know how to balance both, Zoe said gently. Or maybe he just loves one family more than the other. The words hung in the air like a confession of his deepest fear. Zoe's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry you found out this way. I'm sorry about all of it." Michael, sensing his mother's distress, reached up to touch her cheek. "Mommy crying?" "I'm okay, baby," she murmured, but she wasn't. Neither of them were. Ryan stood there, watching this woman comfort his half-brother, and felt more alone than he ever had in his life. Everything he thought he knew about his family, about his place in his father's world, had just been revealed as a lie. "I need." He couldn't finish the sentence. What did he need? To scream? To disappear? To demand answers from a father who had never given him honest ones? "Ryan," Zoe called softly as he turned to go. When he looked back, she said, "For what it's worth, he talks about you. All the time. He's proud of what you've built. Just not proud enough to include me in his real life," Ryan replied, and walked back to his cramped coach seat, leaving his newfound family in first class, where apparently they belonged more than he ever had. The plane touched down at JFK with a jarring bump that seemed to mirror the chaos in Ryan's mind. He'd spent the remaining 2 hours of the flight staring out the tiny coach window, trying to process the impossible truth that had just shattered his world. Every few minutes, he'd catch himself glancing toward first class, where his secret stepmother sat with his half-brother, family he never knew existed. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Ryan waited in his seat, unsure what came next. Did he just walk away? Pretend this encounter never happened? Go back to his empty penthouse and his demanding father as if nothing had changed? But everything had changed. "Excuse me, sir?" A different flight attendant approached his row. "Are you Ryan Reynolds?" Ryan looked up, confused. "Yes. There's been an issue with the jetway. We're going to have to use stairs and shuttle buses to get everyone to the terminal. The pregnant passenger you helped earlier, she's having some difficulty with the stairs and her luggage." She asked if Ryan was already standing before the attendant finished. He pushed through the deplaning passengers until he reached the aircraft door, where Zoe stood at the top of the metal stairs, Michael in her arms and a diaper bag slipping off her shoulder. The wind whipped around them, and her pregnant frame swayed slightly as she looked down the steep steps to the tarmac below. "I can't," she said to the ground crew member trying to help her. "With Michael and the baby, I don't think I can." "Here." Ryan appeared beside her, gently taking Michael from her arms before she could protest. "I've got him." Michael immediately wrapped his small arms around Ryan's neck, and something deep in Ryan's chest cracked open. Despite everything, the shock, the anger, the confusion, this little boy felt right in his arms. "You don't have to," Zoe began. "We're family," Ryan said quietly, the words strange but undeniable on his tongue. Like it or not. Together, they made their way down the stairs. Ryan carried Michael, while keeping one protective hand on Zoe's back as she navigated each step carefully. Other passengers pushed past them, eager to reach the terminal, but Ryan found himself in no hurry to end this moment of unexpected unity. The shuttle bus was packed, standing room only. Ryan immediately offered Zoe his seat, but there was nowhere to put Michael except on his lap as he stood. The toddler seemed perfectly content there, playing with Ryan's tie and babbling softly about Big Bird in Sky. "He likes you," Zoe observed, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and sadness. "Kids usually do. I guess I'm a big kid myself." Ryan adjusted his grip as the bus lurched forward. "What's your meeting about?" "With the lawyers." Zoe glanced around nervously at the other passengers. "Not here." But fate had other plans. The bus suddenly shuddered to a halt halfway to the terminal, and the driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we've got a mechanical issue. Going to be at least 30 minutes before we can get another bus out here. Sorry for the inconvenience." Groans filled the bus. Passengers began making phone calls, complaining loudly about missed connections and delays. In the chaos, Ryan found himself pressed closer to Zoe, Michael content between them like a bridge connecting two broken pieces. 30 minutes, Ryan said softly. Looks like we're stuck together. Zoe nodded, her hand unconsciously resting on her belly. Story of my life lately. Stuck in situations I can't control. Tell me about the lawyers, Ryan said. Please. I need to understand. Zoe looked around again, then leaned closer, so only he could hear. I'm trying to set up a trust fund for Michael. And for the baby. Not from Harrison directly. I know he'd never agree to that publicly. But through a third party, something that would ensure they have security even if. Even if what? Even if he decides he doesn't want us anymore. The quiet pain in her voice hit Ryan harder than any accusation could have. Has he said that? Has he threatened to leave? He doesn't have to say it. I see it in his eyes sometimes. The weight of keeping us secret. It's getting harder for him. She paused, watching Michael trace patterns on Ryan's tie. Especially now, with the pregnancy. Another child makes it more complicated. Why do you stay? Ryan asked, genuinely trying to understand. You're beautiful, intelligent, clearly educated. You could find someone who'd be proud to have you, who wouldn't hide you away like some shameful secret. Zoe was quiet for so long that Ryan thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the bus's rumbling engine. Because when he looks at me, really looks at me, I see the man I fell in love with. The one who told me about feeling lost in his own success, about having a son he didn't know how to connect with, about building walls so high he'd forgotten how to let anyone inside. She glanced up at Ryan. He talks about you all the time. About how proud he is, how you're everything he wanted to be at your age. That's not how it feels from my side, Ryan said bitterly. I know, and I think that kills him more than you realize. Michael had fallen asleep against Ryan's chest, his small body warm and trusting. Ryan looked down at this little boy, his brother, and felt a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced before. The lawyers, he said. Are they Harrison's lawyers? Zoe shook her head. Independent counsel. I saved for months to afford them. They're going to help me establish legal protections for the children without involving Harrison directly. I don't want his money. I just want security for Michael and the baby. And you think that will work? You think you can do this without him finding out? I have to try. Her voice carried a desperation that made Ryan's chest tighten. I can't keep living in limbo, never knowing if tomorrow he'll decide we're too much trouble. These children deserve better than that uncertainty. The bus lurched again, and Zoe winced, her hand pressing to her lower back. Ryan noticed immediately. Are you okay? Just tired. And this pregnancy has been harder than Michael was. The stress, probably. Ryan found himself studying her more closely. The shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself as if everything hurt. This woman was fighting battles he'd never imagined, all while trying to protect children who shared his blood. Zoe, he said carefully, what if there was another way? What do you mean? What if? Ryan paused, an idea forming that was either brilliant or insane. What if you didn't have to do this alone? What if Michael and the baby had someone else in their corner? Someone with resources and legal standing. I don't understand. Ryan looked down at Michael's sleeping face, seeing his own features reflected there, and made a decision that would change everything. What if they had a big brother who wanted to help? Zoe's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Ryan, you can't. Your father would. My father has made his choices, Ryan said firmly. Maybe it's time I made mine. The bus suddenly roared back to life, and the driver announced they were moving again. But as they lurched toward the terminal, Ryan realized he wasn't the same person who'd boarded that plane hours ago. He'd found something he'd been searching for his entire life without even knowing it. He'd found family. Real family. And he wasn't going to let anyone, not even Harrison Reynolds, take that away from him. The law office of Martinez and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, its modern glass walls offering a stark view of the city below. Ryan had insisted on accompanying Zoe to her meeting, despite her protests. Now they sat in the waiting room, an unlikely trio with Michael playing quietly with toy blocks while Zoe nervously checked her phone. "He's called 6 times, she whispered, showing Ryan the screen filled with missed calls from Harrison. "He knows something's wrong. I never miss his calls." "Maybe it's time he learned what wrong really looks like," Ryan muttered, but his anger was tempered by watching Michael stack blocks with intense concentration. Every gesture, every expression reminded him of his own childhood, the same focused determination he'd inherited from the Reynolds bloodline. "Ms. Washington?" A sharp-dressed woman emerged from an inner office. "I'm Maria Martinez. I'm sorry to keep you waiting." As they were led into the conference room, Ryan caught the lawyer's surprised glance at his expensive suit and obvious wealth. Maria Martinez was clearly wondering what a man like him was doing with her client. "This is Ryan," Zoe said simply. "He's family." The word hung in the air, and Ryan felt something shift inside him at hearing it spoken aloud. Family, not just by blood, but by choice. "Very well," Maria said, spreading documents across the polished table. "Ms. Washington, I've reviewed your situation, and I have to be honest. Establishing a trust without the father's knowledge or consent is extremely complicated, especially when he has the resources to challenge it." "There has to be a way," Zoe said desperately. "These children can't grow up with nothing." "Actually," Ryan interjected, "there might be another option. But first, I need to understand something." He turned to Zoe. "How did this really start? You said Harrison was different when you met him. What happened to change that?" Zoe looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. "Maria, could you give us a few minutes? There are some family matters we need to discuss first." When they were alone, Zoe took a shaky breath. "You really want to know? It's not a pretty story." "I need to know," Ryan said firmly. "If we're going to help each other, I need to understand what we're dealing with." Michael had climbed onto Ryan's lap, and Zoe watched with wonder as her son settled comfortably against this man, who was still essentially a stranger. "Okay," she said finally, "but you're not going to like what you hear." She pulled out her phone and scrolled to an old photo. Harrison at a beachside restaurant, laughing genuinely, his arm around a younger, glowing Zoe. Ryan had never seen his father look so relaxed, so happy. "This was taken 3 months after we met," Zoe said softly. "He'd been coming to the hotel restaurant every night, just to talk to me. Not trying to impress me with his wealth. I didn't even know who he was at first. He told me he was in business development, and let me believe he was some middle management guy." "That doesn't sound like Harrison," Ryan said, studying the photo. "It wasn't the Harrison the world knows. This man told me about his loneliness, about a son he loved, but didn't know how to reach. He said he'd built his entire identity around success, but success without connection felt meaningless." Zoe's voice grew quieter. "He talked about you constantly, Ryan. About how brilliant you were, how proud he was, but also how he felt like he'd failed you as a father. He said that. Many times. He'd show me pictures, articles about your company. He carried your college graduation photo in his wallet." Zoe scrolled to another image. A candid shot of Harrison holding that same photo, his expression tender and regretful. "He said his biggest fear was that you'd become as isolated as he was, that success would cost you the same connections it had cost him." Ryan felt his throat tighten. "Then why didn't he? Why couldn't he just tell me that?" "Because he's Harrison Reynolds," Zoe said with sad understanding. "The man who built an empire by never showing weakness, never admitting mistakes. How do you tell your son you've been a terrible father when your whole identity is built on being strong and right?" She pulled up another photo, this one from their wedding day, a small, private ceremony on a California beach. Harrison looked years younger, genuinely joyful in a way Ryan had never seen. For 6 months, he was the man in these pictures. We talked about having a real relationship, about him slowing down, maybe even introducing me to you eventually. Zoe's voice cracked. Then he got the call about the Meridian acquisition. Ryan knew that deal. A massive hostile takeover that had dominated his father's life for nearly a year. What happened? The old Harrison came back. Overnight. The deal was worth billions, but it required him to be ruthless, calculating, completely focused on business. He said he couldn't afford distractions. Zoe touched her belly. I found out I was pregnant with Michael right in the middle of it all. And he asked you to stay hidden. He begged me to, Zoe corrected. He said the acquisition had enemies who would use any personal connection against him. He promised it would only be temporary, just until the deal closed. She laughed bitterly. The deal closed 2 years ago. Ryan was beginning to understand. But by then, the pattern was set. By then, he'd convinced himself that keeping us separate was protecting us. That his business world was too dangerous, too cutthroat for a family. He'd built this wall between his 2 lives, and every month that passed made it harder to tear down. Michael had fallen asleep again, his small hand clutching Ryan's tie. Ryan looked down at this innocent child who was paying the price for adult fears and failures. There's more, Zoe said quietly. Last month, Harrison told me he was thinking about running for political office. A Senate seat opened up, and the party approached him. Politics, Ryan breathed, understanding flooding through him. A secret wife and children would destroy any political ambitions before they started. So he asked me to. She couldn't finish the sentence. He asked you to what? To consider a quiet divorce. He said he'd provide for Michael and the baby financially, but from a distance. No acknowledgement, no public connection. Tears finally spilled over. He said it would be better for everyone, especially the children. The betrayal hit Ryan like a physical blow. Not just the betrayal of Zoe, but of Michael, of the unborn baby, of the family connection his father had always claimed to value above everything else. That's why you're here, Ryan said. That's why you need the trust fund. I can't trust him anymore, Zoe whispered. The man I married, the one in these pictures. I don't know if he ever really existed, or if it was just a fantasy. But my children are real, and they deserve security. Ryan stood carefully, not wanting to wake Michael, and walked to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, his father was probably in another meeting, making another deal, building another wall between himself and the people who mattered most. Zoe, Ryan said finally, what if there was a way to give your children everything they deserve and force Harrison to confront what he's really choosing? What do you mean? Ryan turned back to her, his mind racing with possibilities. What if we stopped letting him keep his 2 worlds separate? What if we made him choose, publicly and permanently, which life he really wants? Ryan, you can't. The political implications alone would force him to be honest for once in his life, Ryan finished. Either he chooses his political ambitions over his family, or he chooses his family over everything else. But no more having both while committing to neither. Zoe stared at him, and in her eyes, Ryan saw a reflection of his own desperate need for his father's authentic love. Not the conditional approval he'd always received, but the real, messy, complicated love that families were supposed to share. It's a huge risk, she said. So is letting him continue to treat the people he claims to love like shameful secrets, Ryan replied. Michael stirred in his arms, green eyes fluttering open to focus on Ryan's face. Big brother? He asked sleepily, the words coming from some instinct deeper than logic. Ryan's heart broke and mended simultaneously. Yeah, buddy. I'm your big brother. And in that moment, he knew exactly what he had to do. 3 hours later, they sat in a small cafe near Central Park, the afternoon sun streaming through windows as Michael devoured a grilled cheese sandwich with the focused intensity only toddlers could muster. Ryan found himself smiling despite everything, Watching his half-brother eat was oddly mesmerizing. He gets that from Harrison, Zoe said, noticing Ryan's expression. That complete focus when he's doing something he enjoys. I do the same thing, Ryan admitted. Drive my assistant crazy during lunch meetings, because I won't talk while I'm eating. Family trait, Zoe said softly, and there was warmth in her voice now, a tentative acceptance of this strange new reality they'd stumbled into. Maria Martinez had agreed to postpone their meeting until tomorrow, giving them time to process Ryan's proposal. The plan was audacious. Instead of hiding the trust fund, they would make it public. Ryan would announce his newly discovered family at a press conference, forcing Harrison to either acknowledge them or publicly abandon them. You know this could destroy your relationship with him forever, Zoe said, her hand resting protectively on her belly. What relationship? Ryan asked with more sadness than bitterness. 28 years of trying to earn his approval, and he's been capable of love this whole time. He just chose to give it to someone else. Michael looked up from his sandwich, cheese smeared across his cheek. Riri sad. The nickname caught Ryan off guard, warming something deep in his chest. No, buddy. Not sad anymore. It was true. For the first time in years, Ryan felt settled. Like pieces of himself he hadn't known were missing had suddenly clicked into place. This little boy, this woman carrying his future sister, they filled spaces in his heart he'd thought were just empty by design. Tell me about when you found out you were pregnant with Michael, Ryan said, helping to clean cheese off the toddler's face. Zoe's expression softened with memory. I was terrified. Harrison and I had only been married 4 months, and everything was still so new. But when I told him, she smiled genuinely for the first time since Ryan had met her. He cried. Actually cried with joy. He said it was the first time he'd created something more important than a business deal. And now he sees them as complications. Liabilities. Her voice caught. Yesterday, Michael asked me why Daddy doesn't live with us like other daddies. How do you explain to a 2-year-old that he's a secret? Ryan watched Michael playing with his napkin, oblivious to the adult conversation. You don't, because he shouldn't have to be one. The press conference, Zoe said quietly. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your father will never forgive you. Maybe forgiveness isn't the point anymore, Ryan said. Maybe it's about doing what's right for Michael and your daughter. Our daughter, Zoe corrected gently. She's your sister too. The words hit Ryan with unexpected emotion. A sister. He'd always wanted siblings, had spent his childhood creating imaginary brothers and sisters to fill the silence of his father's house. Have you picked out names? He asked. Harrison wanted to name her Victoria, after his mother. But I've been thinking. Zoe hesitated. What was your mother's name? Ryan's throat tightened. His mother had died when he was 12, cancer that had taken her quickly and left Harrison even more emotionally distant than before. Catherine Rose Reynolds. Catherine Rose, Zoe repeated thoughtfully. That's beautiful. What do you think about Catherine Rose Washington Reynolds? I think, Ryan said carefully, that hyphenated names might be the least of our problems if we go through with this. Michael suddenly climbed down from his chair and walked around the table to Ryan, raising his arms to be picked up. Without hesitation, Ryan lifted him onto his lap. Big brother, Michael said again, patting Ryan's chest with sticky fingers. Stay. Yeah, buddy, Ryan said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm staying. Zoe watched this interaction with tears in her eyes. He's never taken to anyone this quickly. Not even Harrison's business partners who try to charm him. Maybe he recognizes something, Ryan said, adjusting Michael's position so the boy could see out the cafe window. Kids are supposed to be good at that, right? Sensing family connections. Or maybe, Zoe said softly, he just knows you're someone who chooses to stay. The comment hung between them, heavy with implication. Harrison had chosen to leave, to compartmentalize, to to keep his two worlds forever separate. But Ryan was choosing something different. "Tell me about the pregnancy," Ryan said, wanting to shift to something hopeful. "How are you feeling? Besides the obvious stress." "Tired," Zoe admitted. "And scared. Michael's delivery was complicated, and this one." She trailed off. "What?" "The doctor says I need to be careful. Bed rest in the final month, possibly earlier if there are complications. But I can't afford to stop working, and with Michael to care for." "What kind of work do you do?" "I finished my nursing degree online after Michael was born. I work part-time at a community clinic in Queens, mostly evening shifts, so I can be with him during the day." She paused. "Harrison offered to support us financially, but I wanted to maintain some independence. Now I'm wondering if that was pride or stupidity." "It was strength," Ryan said firmly. "You were protecting yourself and Michael the only way you knew how." Michael had discovered Ryan's watch and was fascinated by the second-hand moving. "Tick-tock," he said solemnly. "Time." "Yeah, buddy. Time," Ryan agreed, then looked at Zoe. "Speaking of which, where are you staying tonight? Please tell me you're not flying back to California today." "A hotel in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe." "No," Ryan said immediately. "Absolutely not. You're staying with me." "Ryan, I can't." "Your family," he said simply. "And family doesn't stay in hotels when they're in town." "Your father doesn't get a vote anymore," Ryan finished. "My penthouse has 3 bedrooms, a kitchen full of food I never eat, and probably more space than you and Michael have ever seen. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I've got 30 years of being an only child to make up for. Let me start now." Zoe stared at him, and Ryan could see her weighing risks against the genuine care in his offer. Finally, she nodded. "Just for tonight," she said, "until we figure out what comes next." "Deal." Ryan stood, still holding Michael. "But first, we need to stop somewhere." "Where?" Ryan grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Toy store. If I'm going to be a big brother, I need to learn how to spoil my little brother properly." Michael clapped his hands. "Toys. Big brother toys." And as they walked out of the cafe together, this unlikely family bound by blood, circumstance, and choice, Ryan realized he'd found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not his father's approval, but something infinitely more valuable. People who needed him not for what he could provide, but for who he chose to be. Tomorrow they would face Harrison and the consequences of their decision. But today, Ryan was exactly where he belonged. In the calm before the storm, sometimes we discover what we're really willing to fight for. But every choice has consequences, and some bonds can only be forged in the fire of conflict. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Ryan is making the right choice by putting family first, even if it means confronting his father? Your support means everything as we share these stories together. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful love stories that remind us why the hardest choices often lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Ryan's penthouse overlooked Manhattan like a glass cathedral, its minimalist design reflecting a life built on success, but devoid of warmth. Until now, Michael's delighted shrieks echoed through the space as he discovered each new wonder. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen island bigger than most apartments, and enough room to run circles around the pristine furniture. "Careful, baby," Zoe called as Michael raced from room to room with his new toy car, but she was smiling for the first time in months. The stress lines around her eyes had softened in the luxury and safety of this space. Ryan had ordered dinner from an upscale Italian restaurant, and now they sat around his dining table, a piece of furniture that had never hosted a family meal. Michael was working his way through a bowl of mac and cheese, while Zoe savored real food. She hadn't had to cook herself. "This is nice," she said quietly. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe." "When's the last time you had help with Michael?" Ryan asked, watching his half-brother carefully construct a tower from breadsticks. Never really. Harrison visits when he can, but he's never been alone with Michael for more than an hour. He gets nervous about, I don't know, doing something wrong. Ryan frowned. He's Michael's father. He's Harrison Reynolds, Zoe said with gentle understanding. He builds companies, not relationships. Michael makes him happy, but also terrifies him. What if he's not good at it? What if he fails at the one thing that should come naturally? So he chooses to fail by not trying at all, Ryan said, his old resentment creeping back. Don't judge him too harshly, Zoe said. Fear makes people do irrational things. Before Ryan could respond, his phone rang. Harrison's name flashed on the screen like a warning. Don't answer it, Zoe said quickly, but Ryan was already swiping to accept. Hello, Dad. Ryan, thank God. I've been trying to reach someone all day. There's been a situation. Ryan's blood chilled. What kind of situation? My wife missed an important check-in today. Her phone's been going straight to voicemail. I'm worried something's happened. The casual way Harrison said my wife, not even using Zoe's name, made Ryan's jaw clench. Beside him, Zoe went pale. Maybe she just needed some space, Ryan said carefully. Space? She's 6 months pregnant, Ryan. She doesn't just disappear. Harrison's voice carried genuine panic. I've had my security team checking hospitals, but... Your security team? Ryan's voice rose. You have people watching her? For her protection, Harrison said defensively. She doesn't understand the dangers of being connected to our family. There are people who would. Our family? Ryan stood abruptly, pacing away from the table. Since when do you consider her part of our family? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been treating her like a dirty secret for 3 years. Silence stretched across the line. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. What did you just say? Ryan looked back at Zoe, who was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, No, no, no. Michael had stopped eating and was watching the adults with worried eyes. You heard me, Ryan said, crossing a line he could never uncross. Ryan. Harrison's voice dropped to the tone that had terrified boardrooms for decades. Where are you right now? I'm at home. Alone. Ryan met Zoe's terrified gaze. In that moment, he could have lied, could have protected the fragile peace they'd built over the past few hours. Instead, he chose truth. No, I'm not alone. The explosion came immediately. You son of a bitch. You have my wife. My son. What the hell do you think you're? I think I'm taking care of my family, Ryan shot back. Something you apparently don't know how to do. Don't you dare lecture me about family. You don't understand the complexities. Complexities? Ryan's voice cracked with years of suppressed rage. Is that what you call abandoning your pregnant wife and 2-year-old son? Complexities? I haven't abandoned anyone. I provide for them. I protect them. By hiding them. By making a little boy wonder why his daddy doesn't live with him. By asking your wife to divorce you so you can run for Senate. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan could practically hear his father's world reshaping itself around this new information. She told you about the Senate seat, Harrison said finally, his voice flat. She told me everything, Dad. About the man you used to be before the Meridian deal. About the promises you made and broke. About how you asked her to choose between her marriage and your political ambitions. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Ryan exploded. I understand that you found a woman who actually loved you, who gave you a son who adores you, who's carrying your daughter, and you're willing to throw it all away for a Senate seat. Just like you threw away any real relationship with me for quarterly earnings. That's not. It's exactly fair. Do you know what Michael calls me? Big brother. A 2-year-old who met me 12 hours ago recognizes family bonds better than his own father. Zoe was crying now, silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. Michael had climbed down from his chair and was standing beside her, patting her arm with small, comforting gestures. Ryan. Harrison's voice was cold now, controlled. You will bring my wife and son to my office immediately. This conversation is over. No, it's not. Ryan's voice was steady, final. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what's right over what you want. Zoe and Michael are staying here, where they're safe and wanted. Safe? You think you can protect them better than I can? I think I can love them better than you do, Ryan said, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. The silence stretched so long that Ryan thought his father had hung up. When Harrison finally spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. You have no idea what you've just done. I've chosen my family over your approval, Ryan said. Something I should have done years ago. If you don't bring them to me within the hour, there will be consequences you can't imagine. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Harrison's voice was ice. You want to play family? Fine. But you'll learn what it really costs to cross Harrison Reynolds. And when you do, don't expect me to clean up the mess. The line went dead. Ryan stood frozen, phone in hand, as the magnitude of what he'd just done crashed over him. He'd declared war on one of the most powerful men in the country. A man who'd never lost a fight that mattered to him. Ryan. Zoe's voice was small, terrified. What have we done? Michael was crying now, picking up on the adult fear in the room. Ryan sank into a chair, suddenly feeling the weight of responsibility for these 3 lives. Zoe, Michael, and the unborn baby who would now grow up in the crossfire of this battle. I don't know, he admitted, pulling Michael onto his lap and reaching for Zoe's hand. But we're in it together now. He'll destroy you, Zoe whispered. Your company, your reputation, everything you've built. He has the power to. Then that's the price, Ryan said firmly, even as fear clawed at his chest. Because some things are worth losing everything for. But as he held his newfound family close, Harrison's words echoed in his mind. You have no idea what you've just done. Ryan was about to find out exactly what it cost to choose love over fear, and whether that choice would save them all or destroy them completely. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of hurting us deepest. The battle lines are drawn, but the war for this family is just beginning. The attack came at dawn. Ryan woke to his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Email alerts, text messages, missed calls, all arriving in an endless stream that made his stomach drop with dread. In the guest room, he could hear Michael's soft breathing and Zoe's occasional shifts as she tried to find comfortable positions despite her pregnancy. The first headline made his blood freeze. Tech CEO Ryan Reynolds under investigation for corporate fraud. The second was worse. Exclusive. Young billionaire's secret affair with father's business partner's wife. By the time he reached the 10th article, Ryan understood the scope of his father's retaliation. Every business deal he'd ever made was being scrutinized. Former employees were coming forward with allegations of workplace misconduct. Financial records that had been private were somehow finding their way to investigative journalists. But it was the 11th headline that made him physically sick. Pregnant woman seduces father and son in elaborate money scheme. They weren't just destroying him. They were destroying Zoe. Oh God, he breathed, scrolling through article after article painting her as a manipulative gold digger who'd trapped Harrison into marriage and was now using their child to extort money from the family. Photos that could only have come from Harrison's private files showed her at her most vulnerable. Exhausted after Michael's birth, crying during what was clearly a private argument, looking overwhelmed in designer clothes that had been gifts. The bedroom door opened softly, and Zoe appeared in his doorway, already dressed and holding a packed diaper bag. You've seen it, she said quietly. Zoe, I'm so sorry. I never thought he would. Yes, you did. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were devastated. You knew exactly what kind of man he was, and you chose to fight him anyway. We both did. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? She held up her own phone, showing him the dozens of missed calls from reporters, the social media posts already dissecting her life, the threats filling her inbox. My nursing supervisor called an hour ago. I've been suspended pending investigation into the allegations. My landlord wants me out by the end of the week. I can't even go to the grocery store without someone recognizing me from these photos. Ryan stood, reaching for her, but she stepped back. I'm taking Michael and leaving, she said. This was a mistake. Where will you go? I don't know. Maybe back to California. Maybe somewhere else entirely. But I won't let my children grow up in this war zone. Zoe, please. Ryan's voice cracked. Don't let him win. Don't let him destroy what we found. What we found? She laughed bitterly. What did we find, Ryan? 12 hours of playing house before reality crashed down. I have to protect my children. That means getting as far away from the Reynolds family as possible. Michael appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes and clutching his new toy car. Mommy sad? Big brother sad? The innocence in his voice broke something in both adults. Zoe knelt carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. We have to go, baby, she said gently. No, go, Michael said firmly, then ran to Ryan and wrapped his small arms around his legs. Stay with Big Brother. Ryan picked him up, his heart shattering as Michael's small hands cupped his face with such trust. I want to stay too, buddy, Ryan whispered. But sometimes grown-ups make things complicated. I'll call you, Zoe said, though they both knew she wouldn't. When this dies down, when it's safe. It won't die down, Ryan said quietly. He won't let it. And you know that. The truth hung between them. Harrison Reynolds didn't lose battles. He escalated them until his opponents surrendered unconditionally. Ryan's phone rang. His assistant's name flashed on the screen. Don't answer it, Zoe said. But Ryan already knew what the call would bring. Hello, Jessica. Ryan, thank God. The board is meeting in an hour. They're calling for your immediate resignation as CEO. The fraud allegations are fabricated. I know that, but the evidence looks compelling. Financial discrepancies, witness testimonies, emails that... Ryan, they have emails that look like they came from your account authorizing illegal transfers. Because my father has resources that can manufacture anything he needs. Jessica was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do? Ryan looked at Zoe, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and resignation. She needed him to choose her, to choose their family, to prove that love could triumph over power. But choosing her meant watching everything he'd built crumble to dust. Schedule the board meeting, he said finally. Ryan, I'll be there. He hung up and met Zoe's eyes. Give me 1 day. What? 1 day to try to fix this. To find a way to protect you and the children without surrendering. You can't fight him, Ryan. He has unlimited resources, political connections, lawyers who specialize in destroying people. You're one person. I'm one person who's tired of being afraid of him. Ryan set Michael down gently, then took Zoe's hands. You said you loved him because he made you want to believe in something better. Well, you've made me want to be something better. Let me try. And if you fail? Then I fail fighting for something that matters, instead of living in fear of losing things that don't. Zoe studied his face, searching for something, certainty, maybe, or the kind of confidence that could move mountains. What are you planning? Something he won't expect. Ryan smiled grimly. I'm going to tell the truth. The truth. All of it. The secret marriage, the hidden family, the threats, the retaliation. Everything. If he wants to destroy us publicly, then let's make sure everyone knows exactly why. That's suicide, Ryan. For both of us. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to win. He cupped her face gently. You said Harrison was different when you first met him. That he was capable of love when he wasn't afraid. What if the only way to save him, to save all of us, is to force him to choose between love and fear once and for all? Michael tugged on Ryan's pants leg. Big brother stay? Ryan knelt down to meet his half-brother's eyes. Yeah, buddy. Big brother's going to try to stay. Promise. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Ryan could promise and break Michael's heart when he failed. Or he could refuse to promise and break it now. "I promise to fight," Ryan said finally. "As hard as I can, for as long as I can." Michael nodded solemnly, as if that answer satisfied some deep part of his young soul. Zoe was crying again, but this time there was something else in her tears. Hope, maybe, or just the relief of not being alone in the battle. "One day," she said finally. "One day," Ryan agreed. As he prepared to walk into the biggest fight of his life, Ryan realized that win or lose, he'd already gained something invaluable. For the first time in his 28 years, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. And that made all the difference. What do you think Ryan should do? Should he trust that love can overcome power? Or is he walking into certain destruction? Share your thoughts below. I love hearing what you think will happen next. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful love stories that remind us why the hardest choices often lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The Reynolds Media boardroom had witnessed countless corporate battles, but nothing like what was about to unfold. Ryan stood outside the mahogany doors, adjusting his tie one final time. Inside, 12 board members waited to strip him of everything he'd built. But he wasn't walking in alone. Clutched in his hand was a small toy car that Michael had pressed into his palm that morning, saying, "For good luck, big brother." The doors opened, and Ryan stepped into his father's domain. Harrison sat at the head of the polished table like a king holding court, his expression unreadable as their eyes met for the first time since their devastating phone call. The other board members, men and women Ryan had known for years, avoided his gaze with the practiced indifference of people about to execute a friend. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began smoothly, "we're here to address the serious allegations against Ryan Reynolds and determine the future leadership of Reynolds Tech." "Actually," Ryan interrupted, moving to the center of the room, "we're here to talk about family." A murmur rippled through the board. Harrison's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Ryan," board member Patricia Wells said sympathetically, "we understand this is difficult, but the evidence of financial impropriety is fabricated," Ryan said clearly. "Every document, every email, every witness statement, all of it manufactured by the man sitting at the head of this table." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Ryan caught the flash of warning in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation," Harrison said quietly. "It's the truth." Ryan pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. "And I have proof." What Ryan had was better than proof. He had Maria Martinez's legal expertise and 12 hours of careful planning. The lawyer had helped him trace the fabricated evidence back to its sources, documenting a trail that led directly to Harrison's private security firm. "But more importantly," Ryan continued, "I have something none of you expected, witnesses." The boardroom doors opened, and Zoe walked in, carrying Michael. She dressed carefully in a simple navy dress that emphasized her pregnancy and her dignity. Michael, wide-eyed at the formal setting, stayed close to his mother but kept searching the room until he spotted Ryan. "Big brother," he called out happily, and the sound echoed in the shocked silence. Harrison's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of pain and longing so raw that several board members noticed. "I'd like you all to meet my stepmother, Zoe Washington Reynolds," Ryan said, his voice carrying across the room. "And my half-brother, Michael Reynolds, Harrison's son." The explosion of whispers was immediate. Patricia Wells looked from Harrison to the child, noting the unmistakable family resemblance. Other board members were pulling out phones, clearly recognizing the implications of what they were witnessing. "Harrison," Patricia said slowly, "is this true?" "My personal life has no bearing on this company's business," Harrison replied, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "It does when you use company resources to destroy your own son," Ryan shot back. He activated his phone speaker, and Maria Martinez's voice filled the room via conference call. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Maria Martinez, representing Mrs. Zoe Reynolds. What you're witnessing today is the culmination of a 3-year pattern of emotional and financial manipulation designed to keep Mr. Harrison Reynolds' legal wife and children hidden from public view. This is outrageous, Harrison started, but Maria continued. Mrs. Reynolds has documentation of their legal marriage, birth certificates, medical records, and recorded conversations where Mr. Harrison Reynolds explicitly asked her to obtain a divorce to protect his political ambitions. Michael, bored with the adult conversation, had wandered over to Harrison's chair. The toddler looked up at his father with complete trust and raised his arms to be picked up. "Daddy," he said simply. The room held its breath. Harrison stared down at his son, this beautiful child he'd helped create, but had kept at arm's length, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. "Hey, buddy," Harrison whispered, lifting Michael onto his lap with shaking hands. Michael immediately settled against his father's chest, playing with Harrison's expensive tie exactly as he'd done with Ryan's. "Missed you, Daddy." The words broke something in Harrison. Tears, actual tears, began flowing down the face of a man who hadn't cried in public since his wife's funeral 16 years ago. "I missed you too," Harrison choked out, holding his son close. "I missed you so much." "Mr. Reynolds," Patricia said gently, "I think we need to table the discussion about Ryan and address some other matters." "No," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Ryan, still holding Michael close. "No, we don't need to table anything, because there's nothing to discuss." He stood, cradling his son, and walked to where Zoe stood by the window. Without hesitation, he wrapped his free arm around her, pulling his wife close. "The allegations against my son are false," Harrison announced to the room. "Completely fabricated by people acting without my knowledge or consent. The lie came easily, a father protecting his child. Furthermore, I'm withdrawing from consideration for the Senate seat." The room erupted in shock, but Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. "For 3 years, I've been a coward. I've hidden the most important parts of my life, because I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of how it might affect my business, my reputation." He looked directly at Ryan. "I've spent so much energy protecting things that don't matter that I nearly lost everything that does." Ryan felt his throat tighten as his father continued. "My son Ryan built his company with integrity and brilliance. Any suggestion otherwise is not only false, but insulting to one of the finest men I know." Harrison's voice cracked. "A man who's shown me what real courage looks like." "Harrison," Patricia said carefully, "are you saying?" "I'm saying that family comes first. Always should have." He kissed the top of Michael's head, then reached out to take Ryan's hand. "I'm saying that I have 2 sons now, and a daughter on the way, and a wife who's shown me what unconditional love actually means." Michael looked between his father and Ryan, then clapped his hands. "Family," he announced cheerfully. "Yeah, buddy," Harrison laughed through his tears. "Family." Ryan stepped forward, completing the circle. "So what happens now?" "Now," Harrison said, "we go home. All of us. Together." He looked at the board. "This meeting is adjourned indefinitely. And if anyone has a problem with my family, they can take it up with my lawyers." As they walked out of the boardroom together, Harrison carrying Michael, Ryan supporting Zoe, looking every inch like the family they'd chosen to become, Patricia Wells called after them. "Harrison, the press is going to have a field day with this." Harrison paused, looking back with a smile Ryan had never seen before, completely genuine, utterly peaceful. "Let them," he said. "I've spent too many years caring what other people think. From now on, the only opinions that matter are in this room." Michael wiggled in his father's arms until Harrison set him down. The toddler immediately ran to Ryan, grabbing his hand, then back to take his father's hand, connecting them in an unbreakable chain. "Big brother, daddy, mommy, baby sister," Michael recited, pointing to each family member in turn. "Together." Together, Ryan agreed, finally understanding what he'd been searching for his entire life. 6 months later, Catherine Rose Reynolds was born into a family that had learned the difference between love and fear, between connection and control. The press had indeed had their field day, but the Reynolds family had weathered it together, united not by blood alone, but by the choice to fight for each other. And in a penthouse that was no longer empty, where children's laughter filled rooms that had only known silence, Ryan finally understood what his father had discovered that day in the boardroom. Some things were worth losing everything for, and some things, once found, could never be lost again. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from choosing love over fear, connection over control, and family over everything else. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to choose love. And don't forget to tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from today, and what did this story mean to you? Your stories and support inspire these tales of hope and healing. Until next time, remember, the family we choose to fight for is often the family that saves us.